Hey YouTube, Joeboy here. So this is gonna be so anti how YouTube works. It hurts, but I think that it must be done. Some of the best theories build off of each other. You know, when a theory is simply too big, you can only talk about it so much in one sitting. But because videos are recommended randomly, you might come across this theory based on and the groundwork laid out in another video and have absolutely no idea what I'm saying here or why it might be interesting to watch. And I'd prefer, frankly I think everyone would prefer, not to have 30 minutes of the same explanation every video just to talk about something related to a prior concept. So, I'm going to include a link in the description, also pinned in the comments, to my Zorro God Mode theory. It's 37 minutes and it is absolutely worth your time. Possibly the most important long-term theory made in years. Watch that, then click the back button and watch this, be entertained, let your mind be blown. Eventually I may make a playlist, but right now we just have 2 videos. This theory here is going to attempt to explain something I don't believe can be explained by reading the story alone and compiling clues from the manga itself. So watch this video with this in mind. It's very subjective, I think awesome and plausible as well. Some connections will be undisputably factual, others of which conjecture based on things that we do know, and conclusions derived from the video. Watch the video I mentioned before, but here's a very brief recap. In my theory video Zorro's God Mode, we talked about the 6 realms of existence, or the 6 paths of suffering, within Zen or Mahayana Buddhism, and how exactly these relate to Zorro's character, spirituality, his powers, and future transformations. The 6 paths are as such: the path of the Devas, humans, Ashura, animal, Preta, and hell. I believe we've seen Zorro's transformation through 4 of these paths, human and Ashura being the most obvious, but less obvious transformations of the path of the animal and the Preta path, or path of the hungry ghost. This is explained in the video, along with the nature of the paths themselves. So through these connections, you can then speculate powers and or transformations based on the 2 remaining paths, the path of the Devas or God Mode, God Aura, and the path of Hell, a demon or Hell Aura. Potentially the 2 strongest transformations Zorro may undergo in the series as he strives as a Buddhist to reach enlightenment, or as it will be seen through the lens of a samurai within the world of One Piece, to become one with the sword, to become the sword. I believe that the moment Zorro first demonstrates these auras in the story will be very significant and climactic. Oda has been saving these for years. So let's talk about Enma. Enma is the god of hell in Buddhism. For those out there familiar with Dragon Ball Z, so most everybody, another name for him is King Yama, which has its roots in Indian and Persian culture from which Buddhism first derived. Enma, while the king of hell, primarily judges the souls of the deceased and determines into which world or path the soul will reincarnate. It is said that Enma keeps a great scroll in which he records all of the good and evil deeds of each and every person to use as evidence against them when their time of judgment comes. He also personally oversees the torturing and suffering within hell, making sure that each soul gets enough punishment so to eventually reincarnate back into a higher path. Like many other demonic figures in Japanese folklore, Great King Enma has a Honji, or true form, which is that of a Buddha or a Bodhisattva, essentially one who is on the path of becoming a Buddha. Honji exists because much of Buddhist lore from West Asia, India, and then China merged with existing Japanese lore or Shinto tradition, such that kami or gods of traditional Japanese mythology came to represent various figures from Buddhist lore and promote its teachings. Enma's true form is Jizo Bozatsu, the guardian of the underworld, god of travelers, and protector of children. Jizo is a warm and compassionate, beloved across Japan deity who made a solemn vow not to become a full Buddha until all souls have been freed from the suffering of hell. It is not uncommon to see small stone Jizo statues along roads and paths and in graveyards all over Japan. While Enma may seem fearsome and terrifying, at heart, he is a kind and compassionate god, and he truly wishes to save each soul from damnation. It's speculated that this may be why the souls of the dead are given so many tests and trials to avoid going to hell. So yeah, now Zoro has Enma and is actually using it in the story. But this sword is really unlike anything else that we have seen in the story. It seems to be on another level entirely, but in actuality it's not. Enma is considered one of the 21 Owazamono swords in the One Piece world, otherwise called the 21 excellent grade swords, below in strength and reputation to just the 12 supreme grade swords, which include Mihawk's Yoru or Whitebeard's Murakumogiri. Zoro's actually now come to possess 3 swords of this grade, the other being Ryuma's sword Shusui and his most prized possession, the Wado Ichimonji. Yet even among swords of supposedly the same rank, Enma is different. As Zoro first swings the sword against his will, the sword cut the entire cliff in half, and afterwards Zoro found his arm withering away. Obviously here it's revealed that the sword is difficult to control. As Tengu Yamahitetsu later says, in this respect, Enma is similar to a cursed sword. The only person ever to master Enma previously was Odin, and the reason for this is because the sword takes your Ryu, or your Haki, your spirit, your life itself, without permission, and cuts far more than is needed. Hitetsu seems surprised that Zoro was not a withering husk after using the sword. Swinging the sword would usually mean death. The sword seems to take and expel your Haki, or your life force, or your spirit, whatever word you want to give to it. It literally tried to suck the life out of Zoro, and then use that energy or spirit to create an even stronger slash. I think that there is a reason that this sword is the only known sword to have been able to cut Kaido. You know, it's a powerful destructive weapon unlike anything explained in the story so far, but this power comes with risks and challenges. A very straightforward theory, not really what we're going to focus on in this video, is that this sword will train Zoro's Haki. Using it would require constant exertion, almost like Haki weight training. It is stated Enma has the potential to become a supreme grade katana. It's said by making a sword into a black blade, a sword's rank may rise. Shusui, sword of Ryuma, is a black blade of Owazamono rank, likely then meaning before becoming a black blade, however exactly this happened, it was of lower rank. It was promoted to the excellent grade swords after becoming a black blade. Enma and likewise the Wado Ichimonji are not yet black blades, but of the same rank as Shusui, so they both may become supreme grade swords by story's end. You would then assume that all supreme grade swords are also black blades, but not all black blades are of supreme grade. So with all these facts established, what exactly is Enma? How will its powers be explained? Why is it different to the other swords of the same rank? And what will its role be in the story? Cursed blades in One Piece actually are rooted in real Japanese lore. The most famous cursed swords in Japan were made by the famous school of swordsmiths, Muramasa, over a 300-year period into the end of Edo, Japan. Muramasa himself was considered a most skillful smith, but with a violent and ill-balanced mind verging on madness that was supposed to have passed into his blades. The blades he and his disciples made were believed to hunger for blood and to compel their warrior to commit murder or suicide. A famous legend in Japan depicts this conflict through a confrontation between Muramasa and the famous swordsmith Masamune. The legend tells of a test where Muramasa challenged his master Masamune to see who could make a finer sword. They both worked tirelessly, and eventually when both swords were finished, they decided to test the results. The contest was for each to suspend the blade in a small creek with the cutting edge facing against the current. Muramasa's sword, called 10,000 Cold Nights, cut everything that passed its way: fish, leaves floating down the river, the very air which blew on it. Highly impressed with his pupil's work, Masamune lowered his sword, tender hands, into the current and waited patiently. Only leaves were cut. The fish swam right up to it, and the air hissed as it gently blew by the blade. After a while, Muramasa began to scoff at his master for his apparent lack of skill. Smiling to himself, Masamune pulled up his sword, dried it, and sheathed it, all the while Muramasa was heckling him for his sword's inability to cut anything. A monk who had been watching the whole ordeal walked over and bowed low to the two sword masters. He then began to explain what he had seen. The first of the swords was by all accounts a fine sword. However, it is a bloodthirsty, evil blade, as it does not discriminate as to who or what it will cut. It may just as well be cutting down butterflies as severing heads. The second was by far the finer of the two, as it does not needlessly cut that which is innocent and undeserving. And so this is precisely what we see in the story of One Piece. Cursed swords. Swords that cut more than a swordsman wills. Swords that are bloodthirsty, difficult to control, and bring with them an inevitability of death for the user or others around them. Oda was clearly inspired by Japan's own lore. Then to wield a cursed sword but control its bloodlust is a test of will. But within this story, you can also see some core Buddhist values and beliefs. Life must be protected and not taken needlessly. Samurai in Edo Japan were often judge, jury, and executioner, and there are many horrific tales to their name. But they justified this and did so as the arm of justice for both the state and their religion. But in Buddhism, in its purest, least corrupted form, to take life needlessly has great karmic consequences. In this story, the more powerful of the two swords was not which obviously demonstrated superior cutting ability, but which knew what to cut and what to spare. In this, it is both the product of the person wielding the sword and the sword itself. Masamune was not wielding his sword, but it knew what to cut. So in a way, the sword is personified. The sword has a will of its own, even those that are not evil, or in this case, cursed. But important here is what Tenguyama Hitetsu says. Enma acts like a cursed sword, which suggests that it is not a cursed sword. So what is the difference? As it seems to me, cursed swords in Japanese lore and One Piece are defined by possession of the wielder. It is not simply that using them kills you, it's that these swords desire blood or desire to commit harm. There's an element here of intent. Those who use Katetsu, or the most famous cursed swords in One Piece, are in a way possessed to kill others. And when you do not, the sword attempts to control you to kill yourself. A popular theory is that Cavendish's sword, Durandal, is a cursed sword. Cavendish can control this sword's curse while he is awake, but as he sleeps the sword takes over, and this is how we explain Hakuba, Cavendish's alter ego. So a cursed sword is capable of possessing you, or in perhaps more subtle examples, changing your nature, and influencing your decisions. Enma is actually not the same as this. It does not desire blood, it does not possess you or control your decisions. It is simply so powerful that any slash is multiplied manyfold, and in the process steals your life force in order to create this power. So it is not curse, it just works similarly. Its personification then may be excessive destruction, for those who prove not worthy, and in failing this you die. But this question still remains, what determines the nature of a sword? Why is Enma as it is? How was Enma and the cursed swords created? Again, this quote may be of significance. Muramasa was a most skillful smith, but a violent and ill-balanced mind verging on madness that was supposed to have passed into his blades. Is this how cursed swords are created in One Piece? Swordsmiths whose minds verge on madness? Here Muramasa was considered to have an ill-balanced mind. This is an important concept within Buddhism, also referred to as the middle way. Within Buddhism, balance is very important. As an example, one strong in faith but weak in wisdom has uncritical and groundless confidence. One strong in wisdom but weak in faith errs on the side of cunning and is as hard to cure as one whose sickness is caused by a medicine. When the two are balanced, one has confidence only where there is ground for it. Balance has a place in all aspects of the Buddhist life. There should be a balance in all things, a balance between fellowship and solitude, study and meditation, seriousness and lightheartedness, self-concern and helping others, etc. Is Tenguyama Hitetsu creator of the Sandai Katetsu, and his ancestors creators of the other Katetsu of balanced mind, as a Buddhist would see it. And frankly, this is where the spirituality of the swordsmith himself may play a factor in a sword's nature. Because unless the swordsmith is a Buddha, we are all flawed, and so true balance in all things does not exist. This is something that Buddhists would strive for, but probably not achieve. So in the story prior, Masamune achieved far more balance than Muramasa, and that was reflected in the weapons that they created. Masamune was closer to enlightenment, and therefore made the superior sword. So in this respect, many swords may have natures, imbalances, reflected from their creators. But let's return to Tengu Yama Hitetsu. Although Japanese folklore and the combination of Shinto tradition and Buddhism is complicated, Tengu are sometimes seen as a form of Ashura. They are demons of anger. In lore, Tengu can be good or bad depending on the story. They are often depicted as adversaries of Buddhism who kidnap children, or protectors of the mountains and forests who may be sought out as teachers, and themselves teach Buddhist virtues. But in all stories, good or bad, the Tengu have a nature of excessive anger, and we see this in Tengu Yama Hitetsu in One Piece. Now, is Hitetsu a real Tengu? We cannot be certain. He is certainly inspired by one. And it is interesting to me the reason he cannot leave the forest has not been revealed yet. That's a hanging plot that intrigues me. But regardless, I believe the swords he creates, like Muramasa, are ill-balanced and thus cursed. The Sandai Kitetsu, just like its creator Hitetsu, may possess a will of anger, or said in another way based on Buddhism and the Six Paths, this cursed sword contains the will of Ashura, and may be influenced by the suffering of Ashura. Tengu lore over time developed a very strong connection to Buddhism. In many cases, Tengu are adversaries to Buddhism or corrupt Buddhists, and other stories good Tengu teach Buddhist values. I actually looked pretty deep into this and it's very convoluted. It's important here to theorize Zoro learned of his Buddhist spirituality and practices likely from his sensei Koshiro, who likely is a descendant of Shimotsuki Kozaburo of Wano, creator of the swords Enma and the Wado Ichimonji. So guys, Zoro's spirituality is rooted in Wano tradition and practices, which makes sense as Wano is the One Piece equivalent of Edo period Japan. So Wano shares Japan's culture. This is to say, the people of Wano and its samurai have been taught the same or similar to Zoro. Swordsmanship, the Six Paths, mastering and embracing suffering as a means to overcome it. The greatest samurai of Wano can do just the same. Just like Zoro, they may be able to manifest auras of suffering, such as Ashura, or at least know how it is possible to do this. They would be familiar with the techniques. The greatest samurai in Wano's history would have essentially the final form of what Zoro is trying to achieve, such as Ryuma. Honestly guys, this is an exciting conclusion by itself that we will explore in more depth in a future theory, but for now let's focus on the sword's natures. This theory is conjecture, but one I find to be pretty satisfying, explaining something in the story that as of yet can't be explained. I believe that a master swordsmith can place their worldly desires or their will into a sword, intentionally, as part of Buddhist practices, and ultimately the goal of achieving balance or enlightenment, but with the added product that the swords made in this way become more powerful. So I'm theorizing Sandai Kitetsu is cursed because Hitetsu intentionally placed his angry will inside the sword as a means to help alleviate some of the burden on himself, in the hopes of finding his own inner peace, as a Buddhist would want. He embraced, accepted, and understood his suffering, and thus was able to place some of it within the sword he created. It's a swordsmith's version of Zoro's Ashura form. It works in the same way. So what exactly are worldly desires? Klesa, the Sanskrit word for earthly desires, is translated as meaning that which possesses a polluted heart, or that which causes distress. As it goes, anger is a fundamental worldly desire that also contains many subsections. Buddhism teaches to try to let go of worldly desires, freeing the mind and body for a state of enlightenment. I believe in One Piece Hitetsu and other famous swordsmiths, such as Shimotsuki Kozaburo, can actually place their will or worldly desires into the swords they craft as a means of releasing these worldly desires from themselves, in whatever small or large measure. Each of the six paths within the cycle of rebirth represents different kinds of suffering, delusion, and imperfection. I wonder whether the Kitetsu are swords of the Ashura or the Preta paths. Swords with a will of anger which lashes out at those who use them or those around them, or swords with a hunger for blood or violence. These are what I'm considering traditionally cursed swords, what Hitetsu would call a cursed sword. The sufferings of specific paths are placed within them. But swords with the will of the four other paths are not cursed, but can also exist. I find it interesting and important that Kozaburo created two swords of vastly different natures. On one hand, Enma, the embodiment of power and destruction, which attempts to sap the spirit of those who use it. On the other hand, the Wado Ichimonji, by all accounts, a peaceful blade with none of the same destructive tendencies. The same swordsmith created both, but the question is how and why. I believe Enma may be a katana infused with the suffering of hell. In Buddhism, hell, presided over by the great King Enma, punishes and judges souls. Enma the katana acts in the very same way. Enma itself is a test of willpower and discipline, and those who are proven unworthy experience torture and death. I explained this magic the very same as before. Kozaburo, as a Buddhist, placed the suffering or will of hell into his sword, to help be released from it and overcome it. In this way, we may think of it as Kozaburo's own desire to punish and judge the souls of others, manifest within the sword, which now does the same. Perhaps Kozaburo was a samurai who strayed from the middle way in his pursuit of justice. In order to use Enma, you have to control your desire for power and your desire to execute your enemies. A Buddhist's primary goal is not to kill the wicked, but rather teach them. And in One Piece, you see this concept echoed within the fact that these Straw Hats do not kill their enemies, and often their enemies later become allies. The confrontations changed them. Just another way in which Buddhism is fundamental and core to the One Piece story. But again, let's speculate. The Wado Ichimonji also contains a suffering. The literal translation of the Wado is straight line through the path of harmony. Perhaps the suffering of the Deva, or of the gods, resides within it, a sword which facilitates and channels a good-natured desire for skilled swordsmanship and the pleasures of the challenge, competition, and combat. Using both swords then offers the opportunity for personal growth, balance, harmony, and enlightenment. They in different ways exacerbate an already existing suffering or flaw within yourself, so that you may come to realize it is there, understand it, and master it. In doing this, you unlock the associated aura of the path to which infused it. Perhaps the Katetsu unlocked and helped Zoro master the path of Ashura. Enma will help unlock the aura of hell, and the Wado Ichimonji will help Zoro unlock the aura of God, or God mode. The different personalities of all these swords helps one achieve personal growth. But yeah guys, just in conclusion here, the idea, just so that we are clear, master swordsmiths have the ability to infuse their will, their haki, their life, their spirit, or their consciousness into the swords they create, based on their own specific natures or the goal of releasing their worldly desires. This could also be a similar technique to which allows for the creation of poneglyphs, which we also know derives from Wano, but with a more spiritual application. Enma and the Katetsu's special characteristics are a product of this, but many swords in One Piece have a presence to them and are personified. I believe Enma and the Cursed Swords are just a subset of this, and other less evil personas are the same and work in similar albeit distinct ways. Every sword is alive, and for a Buddhist samurai like Zoro can help him achieve personal growth, and thus more perfected swordsmanship through mastering it. Alright guys, this is the final section and this is not going to take very long. Again, this is conjecture, but I believe to turn a sword black, you must infuse your haki, or your willpower, or your life, permanently into a sword, so that sword becomes balanced and achieves harmony with those who use them and within themselves. Whatever will the sword had prior, whichever suffering it represented, must be directly countered with your own spirit or haki. I reached this conclusion by drawing from the story from before of Muramasa and Masamune. The superior blade was the one which knew what to cut and what to spare. I believe it's plausible in One Piece black blades represent the ideal sword, the compassionate sword, the balanced sword. I think Enma will become a black blade when Zoro masters the suffering of hell and addresses that nature both within himself and within the sword, so that once it transforms, it will no longer have the destructive nature that it currently possesses. Likewise, the Wado Ichimonji will become a black blade when Zoro masters the suffering of the Deva. I find it interesting that Wano calls Ryuma a sword god. To me, this invokes images of the perfect swordsman, And we know that Ryuma turned Shusui black. Did Ryuma master the paths, and by accomplishing this feat become God of the Sword? These are the 3 stages of sword fighting, according to Suzuki Daisetsu Teitaro, who in large part popularized Zen Buddhism within the English-speaking world. The first carries a sword, and he will destroy all the enemies of the Buddhist virtues. The sword of the second is not to kill any sentient beings, but our own anger, greed, and folly. It is directed towards himself. And the third holds no sword. He is the sword itself, sitting alone with all the worlds within. Is this what makes a sword God? But yeah guys, I hope that you could understand what I was trying to say and that you enjoyed the video. As always, I'm curious as to what you guys think. Leave your thoughts in the comment section below. Like the video if you liked the video, dislike the video if you disliked the video, subscribe if you want to be notified for my future content, and as always guys, have a wonderful day.